Oi, oi, it's the triumphant return of your boy, Jack Slack. This is the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you on Monday, the 30th of... Yes, I missed Monday, and I missed my second podcast last week, too. It's been a exciting few days. Not for any reason that will excite you, I've been doing things unrelated to fighting or content production. But I did get a new Advanced Striking 2.0 piece out late in the week. That was on Jose Napoles' Mantequilla, which means butter, because he was as smooth as butter. Really interesting piece, I think. I wrote it, but it was something that interested me about his style. The man was unbelievably slick in the ring, beat just about everyone he could at the time, and even went up in weight to fight Carlos Monzon. And if you watch that fight, he gives up like a foot in height, and he still gets on him early and hits him a good few times before he starts falling apart, because it was Carlos Monzon. You weren't beating him if you were one of the best at his weight in the world then, let alone a guy coming up. But the thing about Mantequilla was he had this awesome use of the jab to close the distance, and the way that he hooked off the jab was very clever. And I've played with the specific footwork that he used for his hooking off the jab, and I think it's probably an easier way to learn to hook off the jab than trying to do a traditional jab and then hook off it as you step in, or just off the same step. But anyway, gonna briefly recap some of the stuff that happened at the UFC card. I will also watch some of the Cage Warriors stuff. Ian Gary won his title, but also split with his team over the statement is so vague. It's like, regarding recent allegations or some shit like that, and you're going, oh, that sounds bad, and then there's no actual follow-up on any of it. So it could be absolutely nothing. It could be that he was dating someone who worked there and they fell out. But fingers crossed it's nothing that bad, because he's quite an exciting prospect, Ian Gary. Bellator had two fat men circle each other for 25 minutes as their main event, and the real thing that we probably should talk about is the fight that mattered, which was the UFC card's headliner, Cyril Gane versus Alexander Volkov. About as technical a matchup, kickboxing-wise, as you could make in that division. I said that about Rozenstruik versus Gane, and Rozenstruik just got bamboozled, didn't do anything, because he wasn't given anything easy to bite on. But it was, it was a Gane, don't want to say masterclass, but it was a Gane. Yeah, he pretty much controlled the whole fight, wasn't in much trouble. Early going, I thought Volkov was doing very well. He was answering basically everything that Gane threw with a low kick, which, he landed good numbers, and that, in theory, is a great way to go about it, because the big issue with Gane is that he's got this movement. Obviously, there's other issues. He's got enormous reach. He's also really strong, and he's naturally a heavyweight. He's cut at 245, 250, whatever he is. Not just a big flabby dude with tits, like a lot of even top-level UFC heavyweights are. But the big thing about Gane that makes him stand out is the movement. We've talked about it before. I wrote an early Fight Primer piece called Cyril Gane Switch Hitting for the Larger Gentleman. I'm going to do something, some revised thoughts on Cyril Gane, because he had one fight in the UFC, I think, when I wrote that, and now he's got 6 or 5 or 6, I think. I can understand why people wouldn't care about this fight or wouldn't enjoy this fight, and I said that about the Rozenstruik fight and the Bosa one. I think we're a little bit further on from when back after his second UFC fight, I was like, Cyril Gane is a genuine heavyweight prospect and has never had a boring fight, and he's had a few that most people would consider boring now. But the standout thing is the movement, and the most important thing about it is that he can keep it up for 5 rounds. If you watch his early TKO fights, because he was in 5-rounders very early on, or booked for 5-rounders, you could see him coming down off the balls of his feet and standing more flat as the fight progressed. In recent years, he's become a little bit more conservative with the movement, is what I'd say. He's not like just bouncing around like what are those things that do it to confuse rabbits? It's not a weasel, it's a stoat. He's not just jumping around like a stoat, doing the weasel war dance. He is, he's very cautiously on the end of people's range. He's very lightly bouncing, and then he'll do some movement. But now he can do it for 5 rounds. and that's an issue for everyone. So Volkov going to the legs on the counter seemed like a fairly good idea, but he got lost on it, and really it fell off towards, well, as the fight continued. And it's very easy to get distracted from those things, attritive damage, like kicking the legs, hitting the body, if the results aren't very obvious. The poker face, every fighter obviously has to have one, because if you get dinged in the head, you have to be able to smile and go, no, it didn't actually hurt. But the poker face on body shots and low kicks actually really is quite effective. You can make a guy like give up on the strategy. And it definitely helps if you're a switch hitter and you can switch stances because you just got your leg jacked up, and they won't notice because you're always switching stances. It's a real advantage. There was someone else on this card that did that. I'll remember it when we get there, but he was a decent switch. I think it was Fili got kicked in the leg a few times and switched legs, and basically played it off because he switches stances fairly often anyway. But Gane, in coming like away from the very erratic mounting and more towards like a measured style, he's starting to look a bit more like he did when he was a kickboxer or a Nakmuay. He's competing in Muay Thai in France, which has very strange rules. They make you wear elbow pads, but what he was doing there was an awful lot of inside low kicking from orthodox, standing very tall and hammering in knees. It was very similar to Czech Congo when he was in Muay Thai and kickboxing. Step up kicks and good knees. No punching at all really. But to be fair, Gane did have a good jab. But now he's got a fucking amazing jab and a southpaw one too. He did everything orthodox as a kickboxer, but now he's mostly southpaw. Which some strikers have found success with that, like going southpaw in MMA, because you can feed the single. You're not dealing with the direct double all the time. If you shoot your jab, the guy's not going under your jab and just running through you. It's a stance that's conducive to, it's a stance matchup that's conducive to a longer range fight because your lead legs get in the way of each other. As we talked about in Filthy Casual's Guide, Gavin Tucker, I think it was. And also in all our like Dustin Poirier stuff. But in that shorter stance, he's been working from southpaw a lot. He's been tying up people's lead hands, batting it down and shooting the jab. And he's got some pop on the jab for, what we call a skipping stone jab, where you slap the opponent's lead hand down with your lead hand. So it really is a southpaw versus orthodox mirror matchup sort of thing. But you slap their lead hand down and you shoot your jab over the top. And it can also work as a parry. If they jab at you, you slap it down and you jab over the top. It doesn't tend to have a lot of force on. It tends to be something you follow up with a left straight or a step-in right hook, step-in square up right hook. But he was popping Volkov's head back with it. And he's had a lot of success in his last two with the teep off the lead leg. His right leg, he picks it up and teeps him in the gut, folds him in half. And I really liked how he's playing the teep off with the inside crescent kick or the reverse roundhouse kick, whatever you want to call it. That kick, which is like a front snap kick, but you turn your heel to you rotate your hip so that your heel is pointing towards your other leg, and you're kicking up and outwards at an angle. It's the Anderson Silva did it. There's I'm trying to think of famous guys who did it. Oh fuck, what's his name? Nori Chaka, the Kyokushin karateka, did amazing versions of this kick. It's a Gyaku Moashigeri, I believe, in most styles of karate. But he used to sleep people with it. He had a great little combination, which was that kick followed by a jumping knee up the middle off the rear leg. Because you get the guy with basically goalposts, earmuffs, whatever, forearms straight up to catch the kick upside the head, and then you just jump up the middle with the knee. And Anderson Silva did the same thing to Bisping with the inside roundhouse kick or whatever, the Gyaku, and then a left straight down the center. Worked really well. Got his forearms up, shot down the center. But Gane was playing off the front kick to the body, or the teep rather, with the lead leg, that slappy Gyaku, and then also the lead leg low line side kick. But he was throwing it quite interestingly, because that is a technique where it's your longest technique. What is it Bruce Lee always said? Longest weapon, nearest target. You are shooting a straight kick at the front of their knee. But with Gane, because he was doing it from a slightly closer range where he could pick his leg up and push kick the body, he was throwing it from sort of an angle So that rather than hitting on the front of Volkov's knee, it was hitting the inside of Volkov's knee and pushing it outwards, which I thought was very, very cool. And then the way the fight played out was basically... actually, it was really interesting because Gane pushed Volkov to the fence and hit him with combinations there. And there are a few like big Cyril Gane swings, and we always talk about how like he doesn't seem to have as much pop when he's setting his feet and swinging wide as when he's bouncing around and shooting straight punches. And there are people like that. Sugar Ray Leonard was a great example. But guys who just don't have, like, they can't do that dig in and swing from the hips, standing still power. But when they're moving their feet and they getting their calves and their whole legs involved in it, they can really pop you. So they do better with the technical hitting, damage-wise, than they do with what we consider, the power punches, quote unquote. And there's definitely flashes of that in Gane. Got hit back a fair bit, because Volkov's a competent counterpuncher. But he also did it. This is the thing, like, when you're looking, basically, anytime you're talking about like someone who's about to fight a big puncher, and we're all talking about, we're going to get into the drama in a second, but we're all thinking, what's Gane got for Francis Ngannou? And there's a great couple of clips of them sparring lightly at Fight Factory, and that's part of the intrigue here. Gane has been in with Ngannou, preparing him for other opponents in the past, so he knows what it's like to get cracked by Francis Ngannou, and he knows, he will know some of Francis Ngannou's timing and be a bit more comfortable. It's like we were talking about with Brandon Moreno versus Figgy. Once you've seen it once, it's not, you don't have to spend all that time getting used to it. Another great example is Frankie Edgar versus BJ Penn. Scrapes a win in the first fight. Second fight, he comes out and immediately takes Penn down because he knows what it's like to be in there with BJ Penn now. Because no matter how good you are as a fighter, there's going to be a level of caution, when you step in with someone you've never seen before and they're the best in the world. So there's that intrigue with Cyril Gane versus Francis Ngannou. But the other, whenever you're talking about like going up to fight or moving on to fight the big punching champion, it's always, well, he did get clipped here, he did get clipped there. Imagine if Ngannou caught him there, and you're like, it's not the same fighter. Part of being a good adaptable fighter is knowing when you can get away with pushing your advantages, taking the piss a bit, when you have to really watch your P's and Q's. And yeah, Gane did get clipped here because he was stepping in with 3s and 4s. He was really teeing off, or at least letting loose on Volkov at several points in this fight. And he'd get clipped and it was fine because it's Volkov. He's a decent hitter, but he's not Francis Ngannou. But would he do that against Francis Ngannou? Probably not in the early rounds when Francis Ngannou is dangerous. But the Stipe fight, and I think if anyone ever gets Francis Ngannou to the later rounds, you're going to see it again, and people are going to be like, "Oh my god, imagine if Francis Ngannou had a gas tank," rather than Francis Ngannou throws really, really hard. Part of that is sacrificing longevity in the fight. So there's the intrigue there with the matchup of champion Ngannou versus challenger Gane, but the UFC came out and did some dumb shit in the last day or two. The dust is still settling on this, so I don't know exactly what is going on. You're here for me to speculate and talk shit about the UFC, I presume. But basically, the UFC told Brett Okamoto to say that Derek Lewis and Cyril Gane are going to fight for the interim heavyweight title, because Francis Ngannou won't fight again in time. Problem is, Francis Ngannou fought 3 months ago. And you've had tons of champions who've been out for a year before they've bothered making the interim title. Unless Francis Ngannou has announced to them that he's having a knee surgery or something that's going to keep him out of competition for a substantial length of time, that's sus. And then wouldn't you know it, Francis Ngannou came out and was like, I hadn't heard anything about this. I'm not taking a year off or whatever. Bonus, Brett Okamoto, after releasing the party line, said, this will not affect Francis Ngannou's status as the undisputed heavyweight champion. You're like, yeah, it does, because that's literally what undisputed means. If there are 2 titles in the world, like whether it's an interim and a main one, or whether it's the WBA and the WBO and the IBF, they are disputed. You are undisputed champion when you have all of them. It's why the Klitschko brothers were not undisputed champions at any point. They also had several belts each, and neither of them wanted anything to do with Valuev, because he was really tall and they don't like that. But yeah, just bonkers. So basically, what it looks like, and what Ariel Helwani has since said, and there's been a lot of speculation on it, but what it looks like is they're just shaking Ngannou down, not for money, but to take less money. Rumors are that Ngannou is very interested in the Jones match, and I can't blame him because it's a match we're all interested in. And I'm going to ask you, if you are a John Jones hater, and I probably am myself, set aside who it is and consider that it's a huge fight between a champion and a long-reigning champion. It's basically a super fight. It should be worth a good amount of money. All of them are underpaid anyway, generally. The UFC not doing this is basically out of spite, because Ngannou said he wants it, Jones very clearly wants it. Unless you're the Galaxy Brain take I saw the other day, which was Jones won't take it for any amount of money. And I'm like, so what? His plan was to bulk up, put on a ton of weight, and then retire. No, he'll probably take it for the money that he asked for. Truly absurd. And if you engage in that sort of well, he's scared and he wouldn't take it anyway, even though they offered him money, you're playing into a moronic what-if game that the UFC wants you to. They love doing this shit where they're like, Dustin Poirier declined the fight, parentheses, bitch. And Dustin Poirier's like, no, I want more money to fight Conor McGregor because he's Conor McGregor and is going to make a lot of money. They love doing that shit. And Ariel specifically name-checked, what's his name, Hunter, whatever it is, the one that John Jones also specifically name-checked, the UFC's lawyer guy, as being a guy who does this often. It's just insane, because if the fighters don't realise at this point that there isn't the promised land where you are in the UFC's good books and you do well, with the exception of Daniel Cormier, who seems to be willing to settle for less. But they say, win 6 in a row, be exciting, knock people out, become a champion, then it'll all be set. And you're like, Francis Ngannou did all of that. You pushed him to high heaven and he lived up to it, and you're still saying you're still shaking him down. What's going on? And part of this is also, it seems, because they need a title fight on UFC 265 as their headliner. And this is, it's always been a moronic rule. It's the reason that we invented the BMF belt. And it's doubly crazy because, you're going to have, I think McGregor and Poirier was a pay-per-view headliner, wasn't it? Yeah. So you can do it. It's just that they realised that Lewis versus Gane is not a pay-per-view headliner worthy, or not a headliner worthy, so they're going to slap a belt on it and claim it is. It's absurd. But if we're talking that Lewis versus Gane matchup, it's compelling for the reasons that most Derek Lewis matchups are. Everyone makes a mistake at some point, and Derek Lewis finds ways to load up big punches on those moments. However, Gane has all the things that Derek Lewis hates, namely feints, bodywork, volume, being able to get out of the way after throwing blows. We're not far removed from an ancient Mark Hunt making Lewis look like an absolute fool. I think JDS did too. The man just really struggles if you keep some pressure on him, make him work, and don't just let him sit back and wait for you. But it's a good test for Gane because, you're dealing with a fairly competent counterpuncher in that he will load up and throw when he feels like he's got the moment, but huge power. Moving on to Ngannou, who's a competent counterpuncher with huge power, a man who will actually land counters off your jabs and things, as opposed to a man who will land massive uppercuts or overhands when you step up for an obvious knee or dive for his legs. So what else was worth mentioning from this card? Thought Andre Fili looked spectacular. Long-time boy of the podcast. Lovely, lovely hands. Doesn't always connect with huge pop. Tends to sort of just box people up. But this one, he had Pineda. He had Pineda rolling all over the place. Just timing him coming in with good jabs. Pineda, I saw him against Cub Swanson in his last one. And I remember thinking, this guy's got like 1 minute talent. Just everything after the first exchange where he looked really powerful and fast and crisp, he just got worse and worse and worse. I think he's the kind of guy where a lack of fundamental polish really starts to show up through the rounds. You can get by on speed and explosivity, throwing loopy ass blows and timing them right while you're fresh, but it gets harder to beat good straight hitting with big swings the more you go on, and the worse your conditioning is, and the better conditioned the opponent is, and the better technician they are. He's the kind of fighter of whom I'd say his only angles are obtuse. He came out swinging, very quickly got jabbed in the snout, and Fili just took control, and Fili's working him up and down with head kicks and shit. Hit him with a kick in the chest, might have caught in the liver or whatever, but just had him doubling over. Fili looked absolutely fantastic in this fight, and there were a couple of good low kicks landed by Pineda that buckled Fili's leg in, and you saw Fili change stances, but that's not like a tell, that's not saying I'm absolutely done here. Teammate and team captain for Fili, Uriah Faber, in his fights with Renan Barão and Jose Aldo, gets kicked in the leg about a dozen times, changes stance, and he doesn't have anything off the other stance. He only has a couple of things off his one stance, an okay left hook and a booming overhand that he times over people's jabs. But the moment he switched stances, he was basically, one, conceding, you've got me fucked up, mate, and two, taking away all his weapons. Whereas Fili's actually pretty competent off both sides and can hide it. But the downside of this fight was that Andre Fili, like Leon Edwards, lost an amazing performance from his record, basically, by no contest due to eye poke. And it was a bad one, so I'm not complaining. I keep saying, you've got to start punishing these, otherwise we'll just go on forever just poking people's eyes. I mean, we've already had a trilogy of heavyweight title fights between Daniel Cormier and Stipe Miocic, where every single one was impacted by both the men poking each other in the eyes. We've basically missed the boat on fixing this shit, so we're trying to get it back from up shit creek. Double shit metaphor mixed there. But it's going to be absolutely bonkers looking back at this. It's going to be like looking back at Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in the era where they banned dunking very briefly. They were like, back when they thought that people don't want to see dunking, they want to see people do layups and 2-point shots. But yeah, going back and seeing these splayed open fingers in these gloves and people just getting eye poked constantly, I hope we look back and go, damn, that was fucking weird. If we're talking about like tough motherfuckers from 20 years ago, we're going, and he fought in the eye poke era. Not the dead ball era, the rake the corneas era. So yeah, that was that. What else did I care about? Valiev versus Barcelos was decent. I think that won fight of the night, but it was a good little scrap. I thought DC was on point when he said Barcelos just wasn't doing enough. And in fairness to Barcelos, he stepped it up through rounds 2 and 3, dropped Valiev a couple of times. Great counter left hook. Dude should have been kicking the lead leg more because it was out there, and Valiev's only answer was coming back with the right hand, and that's where Barcelos could have landed that left hook that he'd been causing Valiev so much trouble with. What else was good? Tim Means beat Nicholas Dalby in... That was a really good scrap, actually. And Renato Moicano beat Jai Herbert basically by body lock. Just kept taking him down, get into butterfly guard. And it looked like Jai Herbert just doesn't have a terrific butterfly guard. They're all... Anyone who talks about like butterfly guard, or is very good at butterfly guard, they tend to talk about like being sticky with your hooks or active with your hooks, which basically means your hooks inside the opponent's, in the inseam or whatever, you have to follow them. Like, you have to be attached to them. You're not just, like, if the guy just sits there and pushes into you, your butterfly hooks will work without you doing that. But most people will try and disengage from your butterfly hooks, either to pass or just to stand over you. And so Herbert was getting, like, good control of the upper body, and then Moicano would just, like, mule kick or X-pass or whatever you want to call it, kick up behind him and dismount from Herbert's hooks. And the end came pretty quick once Moicano actually felt good opening up with strikes from the top. I think he did that he got mounted like half a dozen times, and Herbert would body lock him and he couldn't do much. And I think he ended up back in half guard and just dropped an elbow on him, and that opened it all up for him. But yes, that was a good little performance by Moicano. Sort of still trying to find his identity. I called him a jack of all trades in the past, but He's been outstruck by some good strikers. Don't recall him getting out. He did get submitted by Ortega in a fight that he was absolutely dominating up to that point. Just shot a bad takedown. I think with Moicano, he should be the kind of guy who can do both against everyone. His transitions into takedowns have sort of let him down there. The people who were like, "Oh, it shouldn't have stood with Fiziev." I think Moicano is good enough that he could stand with Fiziev if he was threatening the takedown as well and working the two off each other effectively. It was getting sort of into like, I'm going to stand with Fiziev until I feel I can comfortably shoot this takedown. Actually, that's something I meant to talk about with Gane in the main event. Ducks in on takedowns, never ever succeeds in them, it seems, but at least he's doing it. He's always establishing that threat. And it's very easy to overcommit and run onto a double leg. Those are the sort of ones that they don't take an awful lot of effort, the reactive double. If you run onto it, the guy's got both your knees or hamstrings or whatever, and your hips, you're going down. So it's a great way to make people work and keep them cognizant of that threat. But that was all the fights that were interesting. But because I owe you some content, because I wasn't here, I'm going to do some questions. I got 3 questions about sumo this week. Hello, Mr. Slack, Patreon boy here with a couple of questions for the jackiness of slackiness with the Maximus. Okay, I apologise for that word vomit. Anyway, I finally watched Dalby versus Houston from Cage Warriors after hearing you rave about it several times, and wow, am I not let down. It looked like a fucking WWE match. Their feet had as much blood on as their faces. Holy Merlin. Also, about nodders, can you please, block caps, do a Filthy Casuals guide to sumo wrestling or at least hakuho? Watching these guys blast each other with headbutts at the tachiai and then use their niche fighting skills is incredibly mesmerizing, and I would love to hear you waxing about it in your style. Or at least finish the Sakuraba guides. Ooh. Thanks for all you do, and thank you for taking the time to read this email from weirdo losers like myself, Oilenix 5 Head, and Ezekiel Chokes Bless. I didn't get who that was from. But then another one came in that was, hey Jack, why don't you talk about sumo anymore? Is it because of the lack of high-level competition in the Sanyaku Makuchi matches? I do not know what that means. I never really... Terminology tended to go over my head. If you have been keeping up, do you think sumo is in a lull? The sole remaining Yokozuna, Hakuho, is seemingly 1 or 2 bashos from retirement, and the only Yokozuna contenders are a massively overweight Takakeisho and Terunofuji on knees that are weaker than Sean O'Malley's. Thanks, bud, big fan. And then, hello, Jackie Slacky. Could you do a Filthy Casuals guide on Hakuho, the goat of sumo? The July tournament is coming up in a week, and it's very likely to be Hakuho's last tournament. Cheers from a Patreon boy. 3 questions there, all basically asking the same thing. I haven't been keeping up with sumo lately just because there's so much. This is the same thing with like boxing, and kickboxing and glory and Muay Thai and everything. I can enjoy. I can do the MMA that is required for me to be able to host this podcast and do stuff on it. But that's taking more and more time each week. You're getting like 8 hours of fights some weekends just between like Bellator and the UFC. Then I can normally indulge in some other kind of interest. But if it's not sumo that week, I'm not going to be watching sumo. Normally it's an old-timey boxer, or I might watch a bit of Muay Thai, or waste a ton of time looking into the history of styles in Tekken and shit like that. I've been working on a Tekken piece. I just haven't been happy with it yet. It was called Lydia Sobieska and the Japanification of Karate, and it was going to be a little bit of karate history, some of the style stuff that she's got in her fighting style and all that. I will finish that and I'll get it up for the Patreon boys, but I hit a wall and I was like, okay. Which is something you generally want to do in Tekken, get him to the wall. But no, I haven't been keeping up with the sumo. I was left with a bit of a bad taste in my mouth when my favourite, Haruma Fuji, was forced out of sumo. In fairness, due to like throwing a bottle at someone's head in his gym. I can't remember the actual details of that, but he probably was in the wrong. But there was another one recently, the death of that lad whose name I can't remember. Apologies, but we talked about it on a couple of podcasts ago. It was that quiet week when it was a Michelle Waterston main event. I was on fire that week and no one heard it because it was a Michelle Waterston main event. But hold on, I'm going to look up the name because it's not right that I don't remember his name. Hibiki Ryu, sorry. Hibiki Ryu was in a match, got like Uchimata, an inside thigh throw, which has a different name in sumo, so forgive me. But is it like Uranagi or something? No, Uranagi's back throw. Fuck, can't remember. But he got thrown. But rather than do like a big theatrical roll, he just sort of fell forward on his face. So it wasn't very dramatic, but he was unconscious. Then they didn't do anything for like 10 minutes, and he just sort of laid face down. Someone came up and prodded him with their foot. There's not a medic in sight, and apparently that's due to tradition, but you're like, at that point, that tradition is moronic. Why are you doing that? It was really infuriating, and if you want to hear me go off on it, go listen to that episode on the Michelle Waterson fight. But that also left a very bad taste in my mouth, and I was like, I'm not really missing anything. Plus, for quite a while, there were a lot of familiar names. There was Hakuho, obviously the current god of sumo. You had Haramafuji, who would occasionally beat Hakuho, and that was dope. You had Kakuryu, and those were the three Yokozuna, which, it's good to have three at a time. It's pretty unusual in the history of sumo to have three Yokozuna at a time. You had Kiseno Sato, who was like Japan's big native hope for a Yokozuna, but just couldn't win the tournaments. And he was also a bit heelish. Like you have the Tachiai, which is where both guys put their fists on the ground and then go. Some guys fuck around with that. Like they'll put one fist down and they'll like stroke their hair with the other hand, or you go, oh, did you just jump the gun? And try and get their opponent told off for it. And Kiseno Sato would do that. And like any other traditional sport that runs on traditions, there isn't a rule in sumo to stop you from, at the Tachiai, not engaging the opponent, sidestepping them and letting them dive onto their face, because they're moving 400 pounds at you, like chest to chest, ready to just hit you. There's no rule against sidestepping them. It's just considered a cheap-ass bitch move, which, that's the literal translation of the Japanese. But Kiseno Sato was like the best wrestler who willingly engaged in that regularly. So he was like, the Japanese were like, he's our best hope of getting a Yokozuna who's Japanese, because the three Yokozuna were Mongolian. And they were desperately waiting for this guy to pull it off, and he was just a dick so much of the time. But then he finally got his big win. I can't remember if he got promoted or just retired. Fuck. Right, I've just checked. He did get the Yokozuna promotion in January 2017. I think he only won one tournament, or maybe it was two, but they were desperate to have a Japanese Yokozuna, so they gave him one. And then he basically didn't do anything until his retirement. I think he tore his pec muscle and was out for like the longest period a Yokozuna ever has been, and then he retired. So it was kind of unremarkable. But the other one that was interesting was Kotosha Giku. He was around for a very long time, and he became... I wrote something on at Fightland on it, because he was the first Japanese Rikishi in 10 years, upwards of a decade, to win a major tournament. That's the kind of vice grip that the Mongolians have had on sumo until, well, I mean, all still do. Put it this way, Boruto, the Estonian lad who went to Ryzen, won one more recently than any Japanese did. So Kotosha Giku doing it was awesome, especially because he's not like a technician. He uses, the push out is the most common form of victory in sumo anyway, but he almost exclusively uses the push out, and he does it like he grabs their mawashi, the thing that wraps around your sumo thong. He grabs that, and he's got his feet in what's called like the shikudachi, with the feet pointed out and the knees deeply bent, and he does like little frog jumps into the opponent and bumps them out like with a belly bump. It's so unique, his style, and he managed to become the first Japanese to win a major title in years. But yeah, there were all these characters, and most of them have gone in like the last year or two. So I have to learn a whole load of new names, which is a real sad one. Terunofuji was coming up, and he was looking like a monster. If you've never seen Terunofuji, look him up, because he was another Mongol, but he's like 6'4", 6'5", and he picks dudes up and walks them out of the ring. And consider how big everyone is in this sport, except as one of the questions said, his knees have turned to like crumbling dust. So that's why I haven't been into sumo lately. But I have been playing loads of fighting games lately, because they just re-released Virtua Fighter, which is deceptively difficult. I mean, it's a 3-button fighter, but it's very, very hard. And they have a sumo character in that, a Rikishi rather. I can't remember his name. Always liked playing Honda on Street Fighter and various, whichever Street Fighters he appeared in. And Tekken has just added Ganryu, who's also Rikishi. I mean, it's pretty much customary to have a Rikishi in your game if you're making a fighting game now. But it's really fun playing as them. I mean, the Ganryu is pretty fun because he's got stance shifts and things. Like he'll squat down and then he'll go into the box splits. Because I don't know if you didn't know, like two of the main training methods for becoming a sumo wrestler or Rikishi are is it Shiko? Can't remember. Yeah, Shiko Dachi is the stance and Shiko is the exercise, which is where you do the squat down in your position like that you would wrestle in. Then you come up on one leg and lift the other leg as high in the air as you can, straight, and then you come down and do a squat. And they build these enormous legs doing it, but they do hundreds and hundreds. Like it's brutal. And then the other main exercise that they use is doing the box splits. They can all do a middle split, these gigantic dudes. It's really interesting because like Lyoto Machida credited a lot of his balance and ability to stop people in the clinch from his sumo. And you can see his sort of like wide stance feet turned out in the clinch a lot of the time, which is interesting. And training in some of the gyms in Japan, it was really interesting because in addition to doing like the shoot up the gym to warm up, a lot of them will have everyone do like Shiko shuffling, which is in the stance with the feet pointed out and coordinating like palm thrusts with the steps. It's a really interesting art, and it's so deep for how niche and like sort of limited the rule set is. But I think it'd be very interesting. One of the things I think they should add to some of these fighting game characters is the Hakuho Smash, which is something that he did. I heard it called Rising Forearm, so Agi, whatever forearm is, Anatami Smash. But Hakuho used to, like, if he didn't like you, he would come out of the Tachiai, so fists on the ground, and he would come up with his right forearm across himself, like he's drawing a sword, and then he'd bring the forearm up, and he'd have his other hand to catch you behind the head, and he'd bring his forearm up and snap your head down onto his forearm, and he knocked dudes out doing that. Like, some days, the weird thing about Hakuho is that some days he just was in a foul mood with competitors that you couldn't work out what they'd done to upset him. Some days he'll be like clean technician, other days he'll be like just an awful bully. But yeah, add the Hakuho forearm smash Tekken people if you're listening. Actually, in the past few years, it's been really interesting finding out how many people working on fighting games have either read or listened to my stuff. There was someone who was working on the striking portion of EA UFC 3, I think it was. They sent me a photo of their printed out copy of Finding the Art, the little book of essays I did. And recently I found out that I'm followed by one of the guys who did the story for Mortal Kombat, the new Mortal Kombat game. I was specifically saying, damn, story's really good in this new Mortal Kombat game. And he was like, thanks, I spent a lot of time on it. So it's pretty cool finding out that a lot of these people are just interested in fighting and striking and stuff anyway. And I will get into Guilty Gear at some point. Once I've mastered Paul Phoenix, I'll move on. But yes, Filthy Casual's Guide to Sumo, I really do need to do. I need to dig up my 6 seconds of violence, The Art of Sumo, that I wrote for Vice, or Fightland rather. That had lots of cool examples that I dug up and saved. And it'd be a shame to start again without finding those examples. There's some really good ones. Like, it doesn't happen all that much, but you do get like palm strike knockouts. Because the crazy thing that I couldn't get my head around originally was I knew sumo wrestlers slapped each other with open hands, or Rikishi rather. I knew in sumo it was legal to slap with open hands, but I assumed that you could slap, but you couldn't like palm strike straight. Turns out the rule is that you can only throw them straight. You can't like swing them wide, which if you're good at punching, that's better for you. Like you can blast someone with a straight punch in the nose, except you just have to have your hand open. You just have to pancrase it, It's a crazy sport. Tell you what, I will try and watch some of this July Basho, especially if it's Hakuho's last one. That's going to be pretty significant. And I will run updates on the podcast. Challenge accepted. What's good, Slacky? Just a quick question about Lachlan. Oh, the subject of the email was Lachlan Giles. Everyone mentions the Danaher guys and a few others, but I see very little about Lachlan. He's maybe the best leg locker in the game. The mind behind Craig Jones and his system and entries are exquisite. I know you've got access to BJJ Fanatics and his instructionals are the best I've ever seen. Just wanted to know your thoughts on him. He's probably my favourite grappler to watch and doesn't get a lot of love. All the best from Billy. Billy sent a couple of follow-up emails with clips of Lachlan. He said, I know he hasn't competed since 2019, but was more asking about his innovations in technique. Lachlan Giles is a really interesting guy because he was doing these really good in-depth YouTube videos out of, I can't remember what they're called. They're in St Kilda in Melbourne. But he was doing great videos on like inverting to retain your guard and stuff like that years and years ago. And he was a guy who, like, in the process of becoming a really good teacher, became a much better grappler than he was. And there's some interesting examples of that. Like, there's a lad called Dan Fagella, who got to ADCC basically just with a club, like a brand new club, and he was teaching white belts. Roger Gracie, when he came to the UK originally, he was on the top of his game, and he basically went from training with the best in the world at Renzo Gracie's to training with guys that he had to teach, basically, to try and offer him a challenge. And in the course of, like, I think it was the year that he went to the Worlds and just, like, cross-choked everyone from Mount. He's working on this really basic stuff, but just jamming it down people's throats. So it's quite interesting, like, what teaching can do for you as a martial artist or a competitor or whatever. But Lachlan Giles, like, I have a specific story about how little known Lachlan Giles is. I was at a wedding a little while ago, and a guy had flown in from, a couple had flown in from Australia, and the guy was saying, like, there's just not an awful lot of good gyms in Australia. And I was like, where are you at? And he said Melbourne, and I was like, you're down the road from Lachlan Giles and Craig Jones. And Craig Jones, I think he broke through at 2017 ADCC. But I mean, even that's quite late because I was beginning to write a little Filthy Casuals guide to, like, that little trinity or trilogy. It's Keenan Cornelius, Craig Jones, Gordon Ryan, their little round robin. And the thing that blew me away was, Gordon Ryan is the youngest because he burst onto the scene at like 17. Keenan's been around forever, but Craig Jones is actually the oldest of the three. He just broke through later than Keenan and Gordon did. And I think that's one of those things that's always important to remember because people are so obsessed with, like, have I got into this too late? Have I missed my chance? Blah, blah, blah. You haven't missed your chance until you've missed your chance. Just, if you think you can be a decent competitor, compete and maybe it'll happen, You got guys like Josh Hinger still out there at like 38 doing impressive things in the in ADCC and the world. But yes, Craig Jones had broken through at the time. Lachlan hadn't quite. I think he'd been to a couple of ADCCs maybe. I think he tends to qualify through the Oceania qualifiers. But 2019, he definitely had to qualify, and Craig was, I believe, invited because Craig had a storming 2017. But yeah, I remember saying to this guy, no, it was a few months before ADCC 2019, and I was like, they are going to do well at this tournament, watch them. And then they did. They did amazing. Like, both, I mean, Lachlan actually outperformed Craig, I think. But it made me feel really smug. But it's just crazy that people who are plugged into the BJJ and MMA scene in Australia and live, like, within a 40-minute drive of him don't really know that he exists. And he competes in wrestling and all sorts of stuff, and despite being, I think he's 34, 35, so he's getting to the end of a competitive career in terms of, like, athletic prime, but his performance at ADCC 2019 was storming, and I think they've put up all the videos of that, because he had really bad luck in his division. He got, I think it was Lucas Lepre in the first round, and he was trying to do clever things with his guard, and Lucas Lepre just ain't having it. Like, he's such a good guard passer. He just stayed on him, didn't allow him anything. And of course, if you go out in the first round, that's always really sad, especially if the other guy goes on to do really well. You're like, oh, yeah, I went out in the first round and lost to the guy who got the gold medal. So I really actually don't know how I stack up with the rest of the people in this tournament. But he entered the Absolute because once you're there, you can enter the Absolute if you want. And that's on the second day. And he submitted 3 giant guys, including Kayan Duarte, the guy who'd won the heavyweight division. And he submitted them all with heel hooks, all the same way, backside 50-50. He let him, like, stand in his De La Riva, underhook the leg, inverted on to the backside 50-50, stomped their knee down to the mat, and submitted them while they were facing away from him. It was incredible. And he had a match with Gordon Ryan, and there was a bit of beef between the two of them. And like every video since then, Gordon Ryan's been like, "Yeah, no, that outside Ashi stuff. No, not outside Ashi. What's it called? I think he said it calls it outside Sankaku. His like 50-50 variation thing." Gordon Ryan was like, "No, it doesn't work. There's no pressure there." But if you watch the Danaher team, they are finishing a lot more heel hooks the way that like Lachlan does, backside 50-50 stuff like that. Because Craig's over there training with them too. So you've got that sort of like two styles coming together there. I really would love to make it out to Puerto Rico. Hey, who knows? When all this shit's over and I can travel freely, I would love to go to Puerto Rico and get some rounds in there. Get my ass kicked by people who are much, much better than me. But then that's the like theme of martial arts tourism anyway. I love going places and getting my ass kicked by people who are much better than me. And then asking how they did it and trying to bring it back and do it on people who are my own level. Yeah, Lachlan Giles, fucking visionary. I've been watching recently his guard retention stuff on BJJ Fanatics. And having a great time. He had some really interesting thoughts on the shrimp and why you shouldn't do it unless you really need to, as in like there's specific situation where you shrimp, because you sort of taught very early on like the shrimp's going to be the answer to everything. But when the guy's passing your guard, if you put the foot down on the mat, you've given him the chance to either smash your legs down or continue running around to north south or whatever. But yes, Lachlan Giles, fantastic competitor, even better coach, I'd say. Like, even if you don't want to pay for any of his stuff, which you should, he still has a YouTube channel where he discusses most of the stuff in like light detail. Before him and Craig were famous in the grappling world, they were teaching all their like heel hooks and finishes and escapes and shit on the YouTube channel. It's crazy. And even after that, like who was it? Kenan Duarte was taking some guys' backs from outside Ashi, and Craig Jones and Lachlan Giles got on YouTube, discussed it, did a really good video about it. It was really interesting. Yeah. Cannot recommend Lachlan Giles' stuff enough. Great guy, never met him, but great guy. Jack, the Patreon article about gimmicky shit reminded me of the best dick move and gimmick I ever had used. Bas Rutten's weird-ass neck crank. Clip of Bas Rutten doing the Bas Rutten neck crank. When I first started training, I remember catching my fellow starting trainees in it, but after some time, I stopped looking for it and forgot it existed. Until now. How legit do you think this is? And would it work in today's landscape? So that's it for dick moves and gimmicky bullshit, but where's Filthy Casual's guide to Sakuraba 2, though, from Alon? Yeah, Sakuraba, it'll get done when it gets done. I'm being Gabe Newell. These things take time. But yes, a couple of weeks ago, I wrote an article called... it was last week. I just wrote 2 things last week. That was fun. It was things that happened in the week. Orlando Sanchez had standing arm cranked Sean Strickland in training and almost got into a fist fight. And the Ruotolo twins, one of them had won another match by buggy choke from the bottom of side control, and the other one took on Craig Jones and got him to go back into their half guard because they were trying to buggy choke him from the bottom of side control. It was really interesting because like you see guys retreat to half guard in MMA a lot now because it's a better way of holding people down and being able to hit. I'm always mentioning Kelvin Gastelum, but like Robert Whittaker had the pass for free from from half guard. Gastelum was begging him to pass guard, like he was opening his legs and going, "Go on, just go," because if you let go of Kelvin Gastelum's legs and you go to side control, he's going to roll to his belly and start standing up. But in Craig Jones versus Taiwo Tolo, he goes back to the half guard because he can't be buggy choked from half guard, so he's trying to work from the half guard to pass straight into mount. So that's the dick moves. Dick move was the shoulder crank, and gimmicky bullshit was the buggy choke. The discussion was like, when is something gimmicky? And I said it's fair to call something gimmicky if you get locked into it. Like if failing it gets you locked in place. If you can't build it in with everything else you do, then it's a gimmick. If you can, like, use it to create escapes, as Taiwo Tolo did with his first attempt against Craig Jones. Craig popped his head out, but in doing that, he lifted his chest off Ruotolo, so Ruotolo had space to escape to guard again. And that there is not necessarily a gimmick because you've used it to get back to that set of and philosophies that all go together in your escaping. You got back to it by using that gimmicky technique. So if it doesn't exist on its own and it doesn't lock you out of other escapes, it's not really a gimmick. And we talked about like Sakuraba and the Kimura from the turtle and how all that fits in. Bas Rutten's weird ass neck crank. You're pretty much, I mean, if you lose the head, it's kind of like the scarf hold stuff that you see tons of women doing in MMA. If you lose the head, they're on the back, and if you have a really good scarf hold, you might not lose the head. But it seems like the Bassroot neck crank specifically is really playing with losing the head. Because if their head slips out, they're basically in a crucifix on you. So it's not, yeah. And the other thing is that, like, it's not, if you fail and the guy just wants to keep his legs pinched while you're pulling his head and legs towards each other. If you've not seen it before, sorry, go and look up Bassroot neck crank. But you have to put your hand between their legs to, like, do it and turn your back onto their belly. So you're sacrificing all the other attacks you can do from a side control to go to this one attack. And the other guy, if he just squeezes his legs and you can't get the tap, he's got you trapped there. Like, he's not going to do anything effective to you probably, but he has just killed your efforts to finish him from top position. Now, am I saying that you shouldn't do it to spazzy new white belts? No, I'm saying you should. But yeah, I don't think you're going to be seeing it. Like, that's the thing. Like, gimmicky stuff. Yeah, I mean, you might get a tap out of someone good, but we tend to streamline everything towards what can I do next? What can I do next? Because, you know, it's one of the things that, like, always competed between, like, boxing and karate for me when I was young. Karate is all about, like, iken hisatsu, one hit certain death, but boxing is all about building up combinations and opportunities. And you're like, but if I hit him once, he's dead. You know, it's like it's hard to by, like, being like, oh, I'll just submit him with this. You're losing focus on how everything should build to something else. The whole point of, like, having the mount and the side control and stuff is that even if you don't get the submission, you're still there. You're still working from an incredibly dominant position. Whereas if you do a Bassroot neck crank and you lose their head, you're just in a weird, scrambly bullshit position. But, I mean, you know, if any of you have, like, clips of you submitting people with Bassroot neck cranks in competition and stuff, please do send them. Fucking love them. Cheers, Elon. Hi, Jack. Big fan. I am currently training and learning about both boxing and kickboxing, and I want to know which styles and or habits some boxers and kickboxers have that benefit their transition to MMA and which don't. An example of this would be Israel Adesanya having a much smoother transition than Gokhan Saki. This will be so much help as I am looking to join an MMA gym in the near future. Cheers. Oh, sorry, that's from Khan. From Khan! That's annoying that you used the two examples I was literally going to use when I started reading that question. Israel Adesanya and Gokhan Saki. Gokhan Saki, probably the more accomplished pure kickboxer, but Israel Adesanya, his style in the ring and his style in the cage look a lot like each other. Whereas Gokhan Saki had to take what he had from his kickboxing career and try and work that in a way that wasn't going to get him easily taken down. So Gokhan Saki, you got to see him do, like, a lot of southpaw stuff in his one effective match in the UFC and try and draw people onto one-shot counters. You know, he in kickboxing, he was a huge combination hitter, like just working people over with 5 or 6 punches to land 2 or 3. MMA couldn't do that. Guys, you know, in kickboxing, like, the clinch is discouraged anyway. K1, they, like, decided very early on, no clinch, because that allows people who are hurt to get back into the fight. They don't punish it to the level that they should to make that work. So if guys are hurt, they still will use the clinch to recover. But MMA teaches people that you have the takedown there. So even, like, dudes who are hurt in MMA do a better job getting the clinch than dudes in boxing, where they should be doing it. You know, like, just because when you get hurt in MMA, it's like, oh, I better try and take him down. Whereas in boxing, guys still, even at good levels, will get... I mean, it's hard because you're hurt and you're obviously not on... you might just be running on instinct. But it's just a terrible idea. You know, if you're hurt, fucking stick to the guy. And that really doesn't help people like Gokhan Saki, because as soon as he starts opening up, whether they're hurt or not, they're going to stick to him. But also the whole landscape of kickboxing, you know, the whole meta... favors or guides people towards that style of combination fighting that Saki does. You know, my favorite example is Robin van Roosmalen, but basically, like, you'll hear it called Dutch drilling. You know, they're going back and forward with you cover up with your high gloves, they throw a combination at a low kick or whatever, then you throw one back. And you'll see it in Dutch fighters especially, but, like, anyone who trains in that sort of style of kickboxing, the cover-up is, like, the be-all and end-all of it. And I'm not saying, like, that's the case for everyone. You know, Giorgio Petrosian, you know, whether you want to call him a Dutch stylist or Italian stylist or a Nakmoy or whatever, has success in exactly the same competitions as Robin van Roosmalen and all these other guys who are heavy on the cover-up, but by using footwork, teeps, pushes, keeping the guy off balance, clinching. So there's nothing to say that you can't do that effectively. It's just that everyone sort of streamlines towards this When he's throwing, I've got my earmuffs on, and then when I'm throwing, he's got his earmuffs on. It's a really, I mean, it's very strange because it's like the highest level of striking is supposed to be things like Glory and K1, but there are guys succeeding there who have a really sort of dumb style of defense. And when I say dumb, I mean like, when we say like an educated jab or whatever, I mean it's just very honest and basic and straight up. Overeem had amazing success just putting on the earmuffs. And glove size, like, I don't think it makes that much difference to hitting power. When they study things on like a stationary bag, having the added weight of a glove helps with hitting power, if anything. But the thing that gloves makes a difference on is if you're trying to catch someone's gloved fist on your gloved fist as a cover up, that'll work when you're both wearing 10-ounce gloves or 8-ounce gloves. When you're both wearing 4-ounce gloves, there's a lot more room for error. There's a lot less space covered in leather. So, like, Adesanya is a great example of not covering up, but he's also a great example of where Gokhan Saki was, like, overwhelm people, combinations all the time, and Robin Van Roosmalen is combinations all the time. So many of these really good kickboxers are combinations and low kicks, and Adesanya is not. He probably has a higher work rate than a lot of these guys in terms of like total strikes, but he tends to throw them in ones and twos. He does a lot of feinting, he does a lot of moving afterwards, but he's not counting on them covering up and throwing 4 or 5 or 7 or 8 blows in a row, as Saki often does. So if you're trying to like build a kickboxing style or a boxing style with MMA in mind, I would say distance control is probably your number one thing. Because if you learn to like infight really well in a boxing capacity, and you probably won't even carry that over to kickboxing 1-for-1. You're not going to carry it over to MMA unless you're very, very good in the clinch, and that's going to take some time to learn. Whereas distance management, whether it's an MMA fight or a kickboxing match or a boxing match, I mean, the distance will change, but if you're in control of it, you're laughing, If you've got a guy out at, a long kicking range, and he tries to duck in for a double leg, you've got time to see that coming, And these are the things like, if you've been boxing or kickboxing for 5-10 years or whatever, you're going to see those techniques coming a lot easier than you will see a double leg. I see guys who train, they did 6 months of sprawl training and they're great athletes and they have tons of combat sports experience, but because it's not the same, like their reactions just aren't working the same way. And that's why you'll see like some guys with really good boxing, kickboxing backgrounds just drop their hands in MMA, hold them lower, because they sacrifice safety upstairs where they can see things coming because they're so used to it for a bit of a buffer on their reaction speed on level changes. If you're not the fastest at spotting level changes, it can help to just have your hands there already, or a hand there. And if you're good off both sides, switch to southpaw, because that fucks people up in MMA. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. No fights this weekend. There is an LFA, I think, on, but I've never covered LFA before, so I'm not going to start now. But next week we start to ramp up to Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier. Great number of fights on that card, so that'll be good. Might drop a Filthy Casuals guide to like the Poirier-McGregor rivalry. If you listen to this fairly often, you've probably got it, but it's always good to get people in from outside to see what kind of shit we do here. If you missed him in the week and you're a Patreon boy, or you want to become a Patreon boy and support the podcast, get the extra shit, we did dick moves and gimmicky bullshit, which was a fun little exploration of sort of a philosophical thing too, of what is a dick move, what is gimmicky bullshit. And then I also did Advanced Striking 2.0 Jose Napoles, which I'm very pleased with. And if you want to start practicing something new that might help you, that's a good one for you. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack, the interim champion of your heart. Bless.